Cool. Thanks for joining the Rapsodo webinar today. John and I, we're going to get started here in just a bit. I'm going to pull up the presentation. Today, we'll be diving into one of the exciting new metrics at Rapsodo, and one of the most exciting metrics we've ever launched from John's work on seam orientation and seam shifted wake. So appreciate everyone for joining. We're just coming up on 1 o'clock here, so we will share a presentation we're going to go through. And then also this recording will be saved to go back on as well. Also, as we go through, we'll have a chat function. So if there's any questions about anything we cover or just Rapsodo in general, feel free to use that chat function because we will save time at the end to go over questions. Yep. Awesome. Okay. Again, like I said, thanks for joining today. It's an exciting week for baseball in general with opening day around the corner. We're actually based out of St. Louis. So we have the Blue Jays coming to town on Thursday for opening day. So the office is really excited for the MLB season to get underway. John and I actually just got back from spring training just recently. We go every year to visit with all of our MLB partners. A really big topic this year is what we're diving into today. With the new metrics of seam orientation and seam shifted wake that John built for us at Rapsodo. So very excited to dive into that. And we're also going to touch on some stories and some feedback we had, not only at the winter meetings, but also spring training. So looking forward to diving into that. To start, just a really quick agenda. What we really want to get into is the education piece of what the metrics are, the new seam shifted wake and seam orientation metrics. First, John and I, let's give a quick introduction of ourselves. Hopefully we've had a chance to talk at ABCA or SABR or some type of trade show. If not, let's give a quick introduction. And then, like I said, we'll dive into seam shifted wake, what's new at Rapsodo, seam orientation, and then we'll end with some spring training and seam orientation feedback and how the pros are utilizing that at the MLB level. So to start, so my name is Brian Page, been with Rapsodo since 2016. So I've been here for all the product launches, from when we had the old 1.0 on the tripod to the ground metrics with releasing the release information on the pitching side through 2.0 to 3.0. So what I do today is I work with all of our MLB partners to where we meet at the winter meetings, spring training, kind of throughout the year as we work with all the MLB clubs and their Rapsodo usage. Also key account side of our partnerships in the industry.
Yeah, and I'm John Garrett, and I've been with Rapsodo since last March. Before that, I was in school at Utah State University, where I studied mechanical engineering with an emphasis in fluid dynamics. So when I was a junior as an undergraduate, I took a heat transfer course from Dr. Barton Smith, who at the time was just starting to research the aerodynamics of baseballs. And I wore baseball hats to class every day, and that's pretty uncommon, or at least it was in the engineering department at Utah State. And so we got to talking about baseball, and I was a good student, so he invited me to join in on this research that he was doing. So I got in on the ground floor of his seam shifted wake research. So the term seam shifted wake came out of our lab at Utah State University. And I participated in that research all throughout the rest of my undergraduate degree and all throughout my master's program as well. And then I graduated in December of 2021 and then joined Rapsodo shortly after because they were interested in implementing what I had researched in school, as well as what I had done as an intern with MLB. The summer before I graduated, I was working on, kind of the data side. And in particular, one of the things that I worked on was the seam orientation data that MLB is providing to the MLB teams. So wanted to incorporate all that into the line of Rapsodo products.
And as we dive into that too, like I mentioned, we were at spring training. We visit in Florida and Arizona every year. It lines up well with the SABR conference. If anyone's familiar with that, it's very high level, or the data analytics side of the game. And John presented on the implementation at Rapsodo of just his work from Utah State of seam orientation, seam shifted wake. And just the line of questions from MLB executives is really, really cool to see. So the big meat, part of this presentation is going to be diving into that, but just came from Sabre to where it was one of the top presentations. So excited to get started. First, before we dive into the metrics, just wanted to talk about our Pro 3.0 just quickly. So hopefully a lot of you are maybe already users of the Pro 3.0, or you've had a chance to see it at ABCA in use. We post a lot of great posts about it on our social media of it being in use, not just spring training, but all of our users at academies, high school, colleges. So that's a great place to check it out. Also, the website has a lot of really good information. We just want to start here because it's an important piece that these metrics we're going to cover do come from the Pro 3.0 unit. So that had launched last year, relatively new at Rapsodo. So anything we're going to be discussing here about the metrics do come from this unit. It's also known for being the first live tool at Rapsodo. So you can get pitcher hitter data at the same time and with one iPad. Also just connectivity improvements, battery life closer to 8 hours. So for those that are 2.0 users out there, not only the new metrics, but the usability of battery life and all of that has been adjusted or improved with 3.0. So just wanted to establish that before we dive into the metrics, that getting these, you would need to utilize the Pro 3.0 system or new unit.
Okay, so we're going to start out talking about seam shifted wake. We're going to spend kind of a good amount of time on this slide because there's a number of points that I want to make. We're not going to get super deep into the fluid dynamics aspect. I'm going to keep it pretty high level, just kind of the main points that you need to understand. So the first big thing is that break or pitch movement is caused by forces acting on the baseball. So for the longest time, we've known that drag is one of those forces that acts on the baseball and affects movement. Gravity is also a force that is acting on the ball to affect the movement. Spin creates the Magnus effect, which we're not going to get into in a lot of depth right now, but that also creates a force that acts on the baseball. And then what came out of my lab research at Utah State University was that the position of seams on the baseball can also create a force that acts on the ball and affects the way the ball moves. And we called this the seam shifted wake effect. So as Brian said, I just gave a presentation on this at the Sabre Analytics Conference, and we spoke about it at ABCA as well. We're not going to be getting really deep into the seam shifted wake effect itself right now. If anyone has questions later on, happy to talk about it a little bit more, or you can reach out and we can connect about that at that point. But what's really exciting is that the Pro 3.0 is going to be the first ever product to report seam shifted wake break, which is defined as the amount of pitch movement due to the seam shifted wake effect. So you can kind of see in this graphic in the top right there, you've got the total vertical and total horizontal break, and then the seam shifted wake vertical and seam shifted wake horizontal break. So the big thing to point out here is that that seam shifted wake vertical and horizontal break isn't in addition to the total break. It is saying, for example, there were 12 inches of total vertical break, and of those 12 inches, 1.9 inches of that was due to the seam shifted wake effect. So this is made possible by advancements in the Pro 3.0 over the pitching 2.0 product. One of those big advancements is that we are seeing the whole pitch trajectory with the Pro 3.0, because we've got those 3 cameras, seeing the whole pitch trajectory. And then we're also, since we're an optical system, meaning we're taking pictures of the ball during the ball flight, we're seeing how the ball is actually spinning through the air. So we can see how the ball should have moved based on the way it was spinning. And then we're seeing how the ball did in fact move. And then that difference is what we can attribute to the seam shifted wake effect. Now we know that there are likely other things happening as well. For instance, if you are pitching outside, then wind could play a part. But we know a lot of pitch design sessions, for example, take place indoors in indoor cages. And so that difference then is attributed to the seam shifted wake effect. And one of the big things here as well, I mentioned that we're seeing how the ball is actually spinning, so we can see how it should have moved based on how it was spinning. One of the big things there is taking into account the atmospheric conditions into our spin break model, which is something that's new with the Pro 3.0, because as a fluid dynamicist, the way that objects move passing through fluids is in large part due to the properties of the fluid they're moving through, which in this case is air, as well as the properties of the object itself. So really important to take into account those atmospheric conditions to get us the most accurate model that we could have for how the ball should have moved based on how it was spinning.
I'd say just a point with that for the usability of it, with those atmospheric conditions being so important, like we know from the years that the ball flies differently in Colorado or Arizona, that's well known. A nice thing about the usability of the 3.0 in the app is being able to save these conditions. So, your academy, your school, wherever you're utilizing Rapsodo, the elevation is not going to be changing. You input that in the app and you save that. So that, maybe you're just changing the humidity for the day or the temperature. Like John had mentioned, a lot of the times indoor, obviously that's going to stay pretty the same as well. But it'll be a nice usability to be able to add that just to get the most accurate, data points possible, not just considering ball flight, but also the atmospheric, which is new to Rapsodo. So an exciting new feature.
Yeah. So Brian just alluded to it. The key elements that we're going to be adding into that spin break model are the elevation, the temperature, the pressure, and the relative humidity. And all of these things you can find in any weather app or just a quick Google search. And then, as you said, you'll be able to save those settings if you don't want to have to input them every time if they're not changing. And the big thing here is then pairing the seam orientation data with this seam shifted wake break data to really see what orientations will get you the most break so that you can maximize your pitcher's movement. So with that, we're going to move on to an introduction to seam orientation metric. So this is our first ever practice product to provide seam orientation data to aid in pitch design. And there's really three key components that we're going to be providing. The first one is the actual seam orientation of the pitch in our spinning ball animation in the UI, in the Diamond app. So for the longest time, Rapsodo has always had a spinning ball animation, but it's been in that just typical 4-seam orientation. Whereas now we're actually going to be providing how the ball is actually oriented as it's spinning through the air to the plate. So this will be a big departure that hopefully some of you who already have Pro 3.0s have already seen in the Diamond app, is that it's not just in that standard 4-seam orientation anymore. And then the next big thing there is how we are quantifying the seam orientation data is with the spin axis location on the ball itself, which is to say where the spin axis is sticking through the ball. So the way we're doing this is with a latitude and longitude coordinate system. Now there's one latitude longitude coordinate system that everyone should be familiar with, and that is the Earth, right? So you can describe any point on the Earth with latitude and longitude. So it's going to be the same with the baseball. What's important is that we make it clear where our origin is. And so that's what I'm showing in this plot right here. So this point is where the latitude and longitude is 0. And then as you move to the right, you're going to increase in the longitude. If you move to the left, you're going to decrease in the longitude. And so that would be negative. And then when you go up, that's positive latitude, and down is negative latitude. And then something that is going to be really helpful in the Diamond app that I'm going to show here in a couple slides is that there's going to be a way to really visualize what the latitude and longitude coordinates mean in that coordinate system. And I'll point that out as we get to that slide.
I think real quick too, a cool thing with this, with working with MLB clubs as long as we have, a really exciting talking point when we sit down with clubs at winter meetings or even just the off season in the fall. With John's, work that he brought into Rapsodo to implement this, we do have close partners at the MLB level that maybe are in a different level analytically and data consumption. And this is how they are tracking their end game, is the longitude and latitude, or how they're digesting it. So it was really neat to see how, when this was brought into Rapsodo, how teams are already doing, this, and we were able to get some guidance as well with John's work on the longitude and latitude. That's what teams, it's new even to MLB based on newer in-game solutions that can do this. So they're also kind of learning as well on longitude and latitude. So it made for some really neat conversations at spring training and winter meetings on how best to show that. So that's exactly how MLB clubs look at longitude and latitude, is the same way you would through the app.
Right. Yeah, so to that point, exactly, we take a look at this next slide. So this is a historical plot of this latitude, longitude, seam orientation data. And these plots will be in the app soon. It should be in an upcoming May release. But this is then just plotting those latitude and longitude points onto, in this plot, which is essentially showing a fourth of the baseball, right? Baseball is 2 leather strips sewn together, and this is half of one of those leather strips. And the reason why we're doing just this 1/4 of the baseball is because of the symmetry that a baseball has. And so Brian was just mentioning, we work closely with our MLB partners on, all of the data points that they're interested in, that they would like us to implement in the future, as well as how they would like to visualize that. And this was directly informed from one of our close MLB partners. This is how they wanted the data to be visualized, or how they recommended that we visualize the data. And so this historical plot is going to be showing, like I said, the latitude and longitude coordinates for a pitch session, and divided up into the different colored points for different pitch types, like you're used to seeing in the Diamond app already and in the cloud already, with like your vertical and horizontal break and velocity and whatnot.
Yeah, this will be a powerful tool for consistency too, just to see how consistent your player, if you're your player coach, that pitcher's arsenal is. So you can see that throughout this example here that John has on screen, the tighter those are together, the more consistent, by pitch type. So there's obviously color coding there on fastball, slider, all the pitches in an arsenal. So you can see also if maybe on a pitch design, the immediate feedback in the app, looking at this plot, you can see maybe if you're working on a sinker with a player, well, how consistent is that longitude, latitude, like the seam orientation for that sinker? We had started the seam shifted wake, which is kind of the outcome of how much additional break are you creating. But this is also a very good visual tool of how consistent are you with those pitches. Because it's one of the strengths of Rapsodo over the years is that immediate feedback in the app and replicating good results. So this is just another tool with that to see how consistent, each pitcher is with their arsenal and how tight that grouping is.
Right. And as Brian mentioned, the spinning ball in the Diamond app is the immediate feedback that you can get. The historical plots are going to be really useful for, as he said, seeing the consistency, as well as pairing that with the seam shifted wake break numbers and your total break numbers, which, ultimately seam orientation is how we get seam shifted wake. And so that's why I started out talking about seam shifted wake, is because this is why seam orientation even matters at all. And why we should be paying closer attention to it, and why it was so important for us to develop it with our Pro 3.0 product. So now we're going to take a look at seam orientation in the user interface in our Diamond app. So I'm going to just kind of briefly explain what you're about to see. So up here in this right corner, you can see where the spinning ball animation is. If you tap on this icon with the 3 dots, that's going to display the longitude and latitude coordinates, the numbers. And then this other icon, it goes through want to call like a replay of how the spin axis got into that into those coordinates from the origin, right? So a couple slides ago, I'll even go back to it. So on this slide here, you can see what that origin is. So the first step in that animation is going to be putting the spin axis right here at the origin. Then it's going to rotate that spin axis into the correct longitude and then into the correct latitude. And then it's going to rotate the whole ball itself into the proper spin direction and then gyro degree, which you're already used to seeing the spinning ball animation in the right spin direction and gyro degree. But now this is also incorporating the seam orientation data. So we'll get back here and we'll run this little video. So the ball's spinning, you can see right there the latitude and longitude coordinates pop up. And then we're going to go through the animation here shortly. There we go. So it takes it back to the origin, rotates to longitude, the latitude, the spin direction, and then the gyro degree. And then it starts spinning again. And I'll just, I'm gonna do that one more time, just so we can see it again. This goes back to the origin, then goes to the longitude, latitude. And what I like about this right here is that this is really showing you, this is the point that your ball is rotating around. And what's important is that this is the positive spin axis. So this is the point that the ball is rotating counterclockwise about. And then it's going to rotate into spin direction and gyro degree.
Yeah, then also just looking at the UI too, maybe this might be a little updated from some of you have last seen it. So you'll notice the strike zone as well has been a different look at the strike zone, more improvement there. And then also a release extension. I know we're talking seam orientation, we're talking seam shifted wake. A lot of that gets started out of the hand with the release window. So the release side, the height off the ground, but also extension. So just wanted to bring attention to that those three numbers are also at the bottom right with release extension now, because it all kind of starts out of the hand to get this. So just wanted to make mention of that as well. Cool. And then, like we said, we did just get back from spring training. So wanted to kind of share a little bit about that. This is, we've talked a little bit about winter meetings. This is when we were able to really dive in and let teams know what to expect for this spring training and what they can now see the true seam orientation, like John and I have covered, and then also getting into the seam shifted wake break that we covered. So the reaction that we hearing from teams is it's another exciting tool for pitch design. A lot of clubs, even though they're professional MLB players, you may have a pitcher like a Kershaw out there that has a curveball that is pretty established, probably not looking to mess with that. But guys do get drafted that may be a high velocity guy with a good out pitch, like a changeup or slider, but looking to add another pitch. Over the years, we've talked a lot about pitch design. And what John and I got to see in backfields and bullpens with our own eyes is trying to establish through pitch design, either sharpen a pitch or add a new pitch for a player. A request we've got since the early days of Rapsodo is that seam orientation rather than the four seam ball that rotates, especially a pitch like a slider, a sinker, a two-seamer. We got to see that firsthand to where a player that had more sweeping pitch to their slider, more like glove side movement. Well, maybe they're looking to add like a gyro slider to that arsenal as well. One of the perfect immediate feedback tools is seeing that ball in the app of how tight that is. We already know that the lower the efficiency, the more gyro spin. But that visual is also helpful to the athlete because they may feel like they've got that good gyro, but they can actually see it in the app. We even see that at the highest level with MLB. So that was one of the neat things to see.
Yeah. I'll say too, there are a lot of teams that are really excited about seam orientation and already know exactly how they want to go about utilizing it. There are also a lot of teams that are really excited, but don't really know right now how they're going to best use this data. And so all that is to say, no one needs to feel bad if they don't fully understand it, because even at the highest level, it's something that's really new to them. and it's new to everyone. And so, yeah, that's just, I think, been really interesting to see.
Yeah, I think probably the most powerful thing at spring training is we had a club that got to see it. John and I were able to go over what the update was with this, and they asked for exclusivity on it. They actually wanted to lock all 29 teams out of it to get a head start and to use it to their advantage. It's something we're fortunate to work with across the league with really all teams, so it's not something we're able to do. But just kind of a powerful statement of how this tool can be even viewed by the MLB of so powerful that one specific team wanted to make sure the other 29 didn't get to utilize it. I think one of the most important takeaways is something that over the years we've tried to mention is, kind of staying away from a cookie cutter approach. Every athlete is different in every sport, but uniquely to pitching as well. You're working with, tall right-handers out of a traditional, over the hand slot. You have shorter left-handers that may be coming sidearm, submarine. Every athlete has a different release window, different mechanics. So at no point do we ever suggest or recommend that there's like a cookie cutter approach, that this is the exact longitude and latitude for a sinker or a cutter. I think as the years we get more data, especially with our MLB data and all, that there will be things we learn about a pitch moving, with extra seam shifted wake based off of a certain longitude and latitude seam orientation. But I think it's just an important thing that this is just another tool to sharpen pitchers. It's not like every guy on the staff should have, the same exact seam orientation on every pitch. That was cool conversations we also had at spring training, is that as these pitching coaches start to realize this tool they have in hand now and thinking about, I have this sidearm guy, I would love to see, his two-seamer on this, his sinker on this, to how much more arm side run they can create. But I think we'll learn a lot over the next couple of years from all of the influx of data. But just an important thing that we wanted to mention is, it's not necessarily meant to be a cookie cutter approach. Every athlete's different. Each coach is going to find different things that works for each player. So yeah, I think it kind of comes down to, this is a really big tool on the pitching side. We've got kind of questions on, how does it impact hitters? I think the quick answer is it's just another tool to create more break on pitches. That's just another pitch design tool. But that's kind of the overall feedback, is that teams across the league are utilizing it, excited to dive in with different players, but there's a bit of a challenge on how do we create, a lot of seam shifted wake based off of each arm slot, a guy towing the third base side of the rubber versus first base side of the rubber. Just a lot of variables to take into account of, changing that grip to change the seam orientation.
Right. And just to add to what Brian just said, the reason why there's not a cookie cutter number for seam orientation, latitude, longitude that we can give you for any given pitch type is because, it all goes back to that the seam orientation creates seam shifted wake. And the seam shifted wake effect is a function of a lot of different things. Some of those are velocity, spin rate, and ultimately what's important is the position of seams relative to the direction of travel. And so for different spin direction and gyro degree, you're going to have a different range of angles where seams are going to be important. And so that's why every pitcher is unique, and as a result, the ideal location for the seam orientation for each pitch type is going to be different. And that's because seam shifted wake is a function of all of these other properties of the pitch itself. Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. So that's kind of the information we wanted to run through. So like I said, if there are questions after that, we know we got some through the chat that we're going to run through. If there's any other questions, now's a great time to throw those into the chat. We can start with one that we got. I'll just read it out loud. It's, can you recap why seam orientation is important for pitchers who might not be throwing 100 miles per hour? How can they utilize seam orientation to stay elite?
Yeah. So this is something that has always really excited me about the seam shifted wake research that I did at Utah State. And that's, you have pitchers who can throw 100 miles per hour and they can spin their fastball at, close to 3,000 RPMs. And the Magnus effect, which is generated by the rotation of the ball, Magnus effect does increase with velocity and spin rate. So the faster you throw it, the faster you spin it, the more Magnus movement you're going to get. But not every pitcher can throw 100, not every pitcher can spin at 3,000. And so the seam shifted wake effect is another way to generate movement without throwing it, as hard as 100 miles per hour and without spinning it that fast. So pitchers who don't have elite velocity and don't have elite spin rate can still have elite movement by properly utilizing the seam shifted wake effect.
Yeah, I think that's what it's all about too, just to chime in that, the whole point of the pitcher is to keep hitters off balance, right? So of course it's a game now where we do see a lot of guys throwing upper 90s and 100 at the pro level. But if this tool can add a couple more inches on changeup run, sinker, curveball, whatever that is, those are just the pitch design of sharpening that arsenal to, if you aren't, throwing 100, to be able to have, more tools in the bag to keep hitters off balance. And maybe adding another pitch based off of this immediate feedback is absolutely the goal to, create that arsenal to maximize it. Another question we got from the chat, can you explain how pitchers can take the data from seam orientation and apply it to their pitch design?
Yeah, so what I'll say to that is, messing with your seam orientation and playing with it to see how it affects how your pitches move is not something that is new. It's not something that we invented at Utah State by any means. I will say, pitchers have always toyed with their seam orientation. Maybe that's just because that's the way that it felt the best in their hand, or whatever it may be. But the more we understand, why it's important, the better we understand the seam shifted wake effect itself, the more we understand how important it is to pay attention to how we're orienting the ball. And so, whereas before, when pitchers were experimenting in pitch design sessions with different seam orientations, they would have to rely on, how the ball looks in their hand, or they would take notes on how the ball looks in their hand, or they would take pictures of the ball, how it looks in their hand. And that was a very qualitative way to go about, your seam orientation adjustments. So with our Pro 3.0, we're able to provide a quantitative way with hard numbers that are describing how the ball is oriented as it's spinning through the air. And something that's important to note as well is that our data is showing how the ball is oriented as it's spinning through the air, not how it is necessarily oriented in your hand, because the ball will come out of every pitcher's hand a little bit differently. So like you could have two pitchers hold the ball in their hand the same exact way, and it's going to come off their fingers differently. And so that's going to result in a different seam orientation as the ball's flying through the air. And the reason why we're reporting the ball's orientation as it's flying through the air is because ultimately that's what's going to matter for pitch movement, is how the ball is oriented through the air, how those seams are interacting with the air as it's flying towards the plate.
Yeah, I think that leads into like another really good question of like, while at Utah State, were, professional pitchers interested in what you guys are doing then, like any specific examples of like with you and Barton Smith's work on that, would like they're interested in like any examples of like early interest?
Yeah. So one big one would be in early 2020, after COVID-19 shut down the MLB season for a time. There's an MLB pitcher who reached out to us, and this whole story I'm about to kind of summarize for you is it's talked about in a Baseball Prospectus article called "Not Just About Magnus Anymore." So I'd encourage anyone to look that article up. It's on Baseball Prospectus, like I said. But this pitcher is Jared Hughes. He was a relief pitcher, and he had just noticed that his pitches weren't moving like they used to, and he wasn't really sure why that was happening. But since COVID-19 shut down the season, he kind of had more time to look into our research that we were conducting at Utah State at the time. And he realized, maybe I'm a seam shifted wake pitcher. And so he reached out to Dr. Barton Smith and, wanted to learn more about seam shifted wake and if that was what was affecting his pitches. And by working with Dr. Smith and really focusing on adjusting his seam orientation, he was able to find that his pitches weren't moving the same, but it was due to inconsistencies in his seam orientation rather than inconsistencies in his spin axis, which is what he originally thought. And he originally thought that because up until our research at Utah State, the only thing that we knew that had an effect on movement was spin axis and the Magnus effect. And so by working with Dr. Smith and learning about our research that we were conducting, he was able to really fine tune his seam orientation to get back to the movement that he was used to getting.
Cool.
So,
awesome. Yeah. Well, with that, we just want to say thanks for the time today. Again, this recording will be available. If there are any questions about the data we covered, the 3.0 product, anything Rapsodo, are just on the last slide here. Just sales@rapsodo.com would be the best place to reach out. Again, stay tuned with our social media. We post a lot about this with the 3.0 usage. Same with the website. There's a lot of really good info about 3.0 and everything Rapsodo offers. So thanks again for the time, and feel free to reach out with any questions. We'll look forward to answering those.
Thank you.